Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we are going to be talking about immigration and slavery in colonial America. Immigrants populate the colonies. As the colonies developed, Europeans began to arrive in greater numbers. At first, most immigrants were English, but during the 1700s, larger numbers of Germans and Scots-Irish arrived. Africans who had been taken unwillingly from their homelands and enslaved also arrived. These newcomers would reshape American colonial society. We're going to see a lot of things change as these new groups of people move into the colonies. You know, today people call America a melting pot. And what that means is we are a country of immigrants. We are a country of multiculturalism. The culture of America is multiculturalism. You know, we are made up of many different people of many different backgrounds, and this is where we're going to start seeing where all of these different cultures come from. This is a picture of a contract. It says here, indentured servants signed labor contracts like this one, which bonded a man to work a period of time for a Pennsylvania farmer. Other indentured servants worked as payment for the cost of their transatlantic passage. So there were people who worked as indentured servants that they would pretty much agree to labor for a person, sometimes for no payment, but just as a way to get into America. There were people that were that desperate to get out of Europe. The Scots and Scots-Irish. While English immigration shrank, Scottish immigration soared. Generally poorer than the English, the Scots had more reasons to seek their fortunes elsewhere. They also gained easier legal access to the colonies after 1707. In that year, Great Britain was formed by the union of England, Wales, and Scotland. So a lot of people from Scotland and Ireland are going to start immigrating to the United States. Well, to the colonies, I should say. What will become the United States. There's also going to be a lot of people from Germany. Germans were second only to the Scots-Irish as 18th century immigrants from Europe to British America. Most of the 100,000 who immigrated to the colonies were Protestant. Almost all came from the Rhine Valley in southwestern Germany and northern Switzerland. What factors explain the flood of German immigrants? They felt pushed by war, taxes, and religious persecution. During the 1700s, Germany was divided into many small principalities, frequently involved in wars. To build palaces and to wage war, German princes heavily taxed their people and forced young men to join their army. Most princes also demanded religious conformity. Germany also lacked enough farmland for its growing population. So there were a lot of things in Germany that were not very good for the everyday person. Now, if you were one of these super wealthy princes or were a royal, you know, times were good. But these German princes would often be fighting with each other for superiority and would force the people to join their armies. So a lot of people used this time to get up and get out of Germany. Immigrants from England. During the 1600s, about 90% of the migrants in the English colonies came from England. About half of these immigrants were indentured servants, which were poor immigrants who paid for passage to the colonies by agreeing to work for 4 to 7 years. Instead of receiving a wage, indentured servants received basic food, clothing, and shelter, generally just enough to keep them alive. At the end of their term, they were supposed to receive clothes, tools, food, and sometimes land. So a lot of people use this as an opportunity to get out of their situation in Europe. You know, back in England, they were poor, they were homeless. You know, as you might think back to, we were talking before about how England had a massive problem with the urban poor. You know, there were homeless people that they didn't know what they were going to do with, so they used this as an opportunity. They could sign a contract to become an indentured servant, and after they worked the agreed amount of time, they would be given land and they could be landowners and start to make a name for themselves. And while they had to live in terrible conditions, people saw this as a way out of their situation, out of their lot in life. So while it was not a great scenario, it was a way for them to break out of this terrible situation they had found themselves in. Immigration drives change and diversity. Immigration brought changes to the colonies. In Pennsylvania, for instance, new waves of Scottish and German immigrants made the Quakers a minority in that colony. Although the different groups often distrusted one another at first, no group was large enough to impose its beliefs or to drive the others out of the colony. Instead, they all gradually accepted that a diverse society was an economic boon and the best guarantee for their own faith. So while this is happening in Pennsylvania, a lot of different groups are coming there, and at first they were kind of resistant to all of these new people and new ideas coming in. But then they realized that as more groups of people came in and brought their own ideas and their own cultures and their own skills, that this was going to be what was better for their communities. You know, if you have a community where everybody works one type of job, well, that might be all well and good for that, but whenever you want something different, it's going to be very hard for that community to do business. So whenever all of these people that were bringing their own skills, bringing their own culture, bringing their own ideas, it was going to make a more well-rounded society. And that was a big boost for Pennsylvania. Alright, here's a graph that shows how the colonies grow over time, and how as more and more people learn about the opportunities that they could have in America, or in the American colonies, I should say, immigration grows at a steady pace. This is a map that shows the paths and the travel that they would take from Europe into America. Enslaved Africans provide labor. During the 1600s, landowning colonists in the Chesapeake region needed workers to raise crops. Indentured servants filled this need, but most early indentured servants were English. Yet, as English immigration began to decline in the late 1600s, the demand for labor in the colonies grew. As a result, many colonists began to turn to another source of labor, enslaved Africans. So this is where we're going to start seeing the growth of slavery in the colonies. Now, it wasn't just in the colonial America. There were a lot of slaves that were taken and dropped in what is called the West Indies, or as we know, as you may have heard, the South American islands here. Barbados, Jamaica, Cuba, there were massive plantations there, mostly sugar plantations, that they bought a lot of slaves as well. Slavery emerges in the colonies. Early in the 1600s, colonists often treated African workers just as they treated indentured servants, giving them their freedom after several years of service. Freed blacks could own land, vote, and even buy enslaved Africans of their own. By the mid-1600s, however, most colonies began to pass laws that supported the permanent enslavement of Africans. In 1705, Virginia's General Assembly declared that all servants imported who were not Christians in their native country shall be accounted and be slaves. Other laws stated that children of enslaved African Americans were also enslaved. This change in legal status promoted the racist idea that people of African origin were inferior to whites. So, early slaves were treated like the indentured servants. They would work for a time and then they would be freed. Well, after a while, we see a change in the legal status where African enslavement was permanent, and even to the point to where the children of slaves were born and they were immediately slaves. They were immediately property. Now this, the only difference between the enslaved Africans and the people that came from Europe that were indentured servants were the color of their skin. So this is going to give rise to the notion and the idea that white people are superior. So that is where this origin comes from for that type of terrible racist thinking, is that due to the color of their skin and where they were from, that they were inferior to others. So that's where this racist ideology comes from. Okay guys, that's going to be it for this video. The next video, we're going to talk more about slavery in the colonies and how it grew and how it became so widespread and the impact it has on early colonial society. Okay, guys, I hope everybody's having a great day, and I'll see you again real soon.